Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 20th day of February in the year of our Lord 2025. I will be talking about taking on or contending with the deep state or permanent Washington and how that relates to money, debt, credit, and taxes. Many taxpayers feel as if they have been and are being robbed by government officials and bureaucrats, and that just might be because they are. If you're like me, you know a lot of people who live on the edge, barely making ends meet from week to week. I meet people literally every day in my law practice who tell me they are one missed paycheck from the street. It's very distressing for those people when they find that much of the money taken from them as taxes was stolen by some invisible blob operating out of Washington, D.C. We are told during each presidential administration that the country has cast itself into penury by ceaseless efforts to care for its population as well as maintain a global security network to keep them safe and free. That statement is the opposite of the truth, as is normal for Washington. The recent theft, estimated at $4.7 trillion, at least known so far, represents about two-thirds of the annual national budget, but it disappears and is apparently impossible to trace. Nobody who should know does know. Even fewer care where it goes. People are starting to wonder how someone comes to Washington, D.C. with modest net worth and makes a salary of $170,000 per year for, say, 10 years, and suddenly has a net worth of over $100 million. How does that work? For example, Samantha Power, former head of USAID, in 4 years her net worth went from $6.4 million to $30 million on a salary of $180,000 per year. That net worth represents approximately 100 times her salary, so I wonder how she achieved such a miracle. Just a smart lady, I guess. I would certainly advise anyone who has a desire to get rich in the stock market to look at the portfolios of Samantha Power and Nancy Pelosi. Follow their trades because they are indeed stock-picking geniuses. The answers to some of those puzzling questions are starting to be found, though, found through the efforts of Doge. So the next question becomes, what can we do about the theft of our labor? Speaking for myself, I dread April 15th this year as I have never dreaded it before. I never look forward to tax day, but my wife and I manage each year to find the money. Somehow they demand from us and pay it. With a good-natured shrug of our shoulders, that was before we knew for certain that we were being robbed each year. I have been working and paying federal taxes for about 60 years now, so that's a lot of money. I normally don't agree with or support the useless, stupid, unconstitutional wars that Washington seems to constantly find its way into, but I know that Pentagon has an enormous black hole where trillions disappear and remain unaccounted for. This is how I think people are starting to view the government, its employees, and the economy in general. People are skeptical. They always have been skeptical, but now they're turning from just skepticism to downright mistrust and dislike. I know many people are thinking this way because I talk to different people each day primarily about their finances as we try together to find some way out of a debt morass for them. It appears there are two parallel economies at work. One is for those people slaving away at a real job while trying to make ends meet and feed their families despite being bled dry by the IRS. It's amazing how closely the debt load of working people matches the money taken from them by the IRS. That doesn't even include the state income taxes of most states, sales taxes, most importantly, property taxes. The other economy is for those who benefit from and conduct the theft of the labor of normal people. Here's something most people probably don't know, folks. I conclude that most people don't understand they're being robbed because I talk to them each day about it. They are starting to wake up, however, thanks to the work of Doge, and despite the best efforts of permanent Washington to keep them in the dark about its theft and its enforced debt slavery. Here's what I mean. The Constitution was ratified in 1789. Most people would say that is when the nation began, although the Declaration of Independence from Great Britain was issued and signed in 1774. A war had to be fought. Then the politicians had to have their time, have their meetings to get the nation started. The United States government managed to survive somehow and pay its bills until 1913, when the bankers told us we could not survive another minute without an income tax, and that authority over money had to be ceded to an all-powerful central bank. The tax was small at first and affected mostly extremely high-wealth individuals, but the bankers were smart. They played the long game. They tilted the mechanisms of the economy downward toward them so that little by little all money flowed downhill into the banks. Now those of us who pay taxes on our income and on our real property are slaves in the classic definition of the word. The tax makes the government the owner of part of your labor, and that part is whatever the government through its tax code says it is. The property tax establishes ownership of your home by the government. You have government permission to live there, only as long as you pay the tax. If you own your home free and clear of the bank, you really don't own it, because if you stop paying the government, they will take your home and sell it. The classic and historic definition of a free person is someone who owns his own labor. He is free to earn and profit from his own labor. I find myself in historic debate and discussion about such subjects quite often, both in person and online. When I'm talking to a person about slavery, for example, slavery in the pre-Civil War South, that person sometimes argues that it wasn't as bad as it seems because the slaves were not owned. It was their labor that was owned. Well, you see, that's a stupid argument, and it's easy to refute. But it's slavery either way because it fits the very definition of the word. If Trump were able to replace the income tax with a tariff-based economy, as he said he would like to do, he would be one of the greatest Americans to live since the founders. To even mention it demonstrates that he recognizes the problems and wants to set the American people free, or at least loosen the chains a little bit. The level of theft is now becoming apparent to any of us not living off the spoils of theft. I think that is most of us still. The revealed theft is simply the icing on the government cake. It's been revealed to any of us who cares to look at the absolute depth of depravity to which our rulers have sunk. They just forced their science on us and deprived many of us of the little we had. That includes, for many, their lives. They took away our jobs, our businesses, locked us in our homes, forced their death vaccine on us, and worse, on our unsuspecting children. Now, we know that if that were not enough, they stole what little we managed to keep from the grasp of the bankers. To close out this tariff section, excuse me, folks, to close out this tariff section of my report, I want to quote my favorite economist, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Quote, "The information from DOGE of the enormous fraud, abuse, and self-dealing that the U.S. budget contains as a slush fund for insiders and for bribing foreign politicians and overthrowing foreign governments indicates that sufficient reductions are possible to establish a tariff at a reasonable rate to rescue Americans from the slavery of an income tax would be one of the greatest achievements in history. Let's achieve it," end quote. The knowledge of the atrocities visited on us by the government is becoming clear to more and more people. For example, a recent article published by the Ron Paul Institute titled "The Most Dramatic Narrative Shift in Modern History" was written by Jeffrey Tucker. He argues that this dramatic shift he described was COVID. Quote, "Government was not what we thought. It is something else. It does not serve the public. It serves its own interest," end quote. I will add a comment of my own to Mr. Tucker's words, and that it virtually never tells us the truth about what its interests actually are. The governments of the world are made of fallen, corrupt people, and the founders understood that, so they designed a system of checks and balances so meticulous that nothing ever seemed to work efficiently. The men who wrote the Constitution and who signed and debated and ultimately ratified it for all of us, for our posterity, didn't even trust each other to run the government. Jefferson and Adams in particular fought verbally throughout the process. They didn't resolve their dispute until Adams was on his deathbed. Vice President Burr killed Treasury Secretary Hamilton in a pistol duel. Madison and Hamilton wrote of these things, explained them in the Federalist Papers. The idea is that no one who seeks political power can be trusted with it. Therefore, they sought to, quote, bind them with the chains of the Constitution, end quote. Trump doesn't seem to understand much political, economic, or military history, folks, but I hope he studies some Russian history before he meets face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. It seems to me that it would be difficult to deal adequately or accurately with Russians unless you understand something of how Russia has spent, say, the last 1,200 years. There are some early but very hopeful signs, however, including his announced 90-minute telephone call with Putin. Quote, I just had a lengthy, highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people and we likewise lost so many. We each talked about the strengths of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia/Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense, end quote. In my opinion, then, folks, in my opinion, restoring ties with Russia, negotiating a settlement of the Ukraine war would be very big blows to the deep state, or a permanent Washington, if you prefer. So big, I fear for his life, because opening ties with the two biggest enemies, Russia and China, will cost the deep state or military-industrial complex a lot of money, potentially spoil their future. The stocks of the MIC companies have already declined rapidly since the inauguration. For that reason, I fear for his life, because there have been at least 2 attempts on his life that we know of so far. It would not shock me if some deep state operative had another lone nut waiting out there. It appears obvious that given the 2 assassination attempts, the lawfare attacks, the corrupt prosecutors sicked on him by a corrupt Department of Justice, and a corrupt president, Donald Trump has decided to adopt a laser-focused attack on the deep state using people he trusts who have the right point of view for the positions he entrusted to them. Tulsi Gabbard at Intelligence, Kash Patel at FBI, 2 of the most important members of the cabinet, because the organizations they now head were at the very heart of the entrenched deep state corruption. These organizations led the corrupt fight from Russiagate to the Hunter laptop cover-up that served to undo his first term. He therefore chose people he thinks will not let that happen again. Each of his nominees so far have made it clear that they intend to depart from deep state norms. Finally, folks, this is a very important period in American history. We, as the American people, can rein in the theft, the waste, the corruption, or we can just let it run, even participate in it. If so, financial collapse is inevitable. I don't think spending is really going to be cut, as is reflected in the newly passed budget deal, which envisions $2 trillion deficits on into the future. Even among Trump supporters, the determination to make real cuts in anything other than foreign aid appear to be non-existent. Therefore, this really is just theater for our entertainment. Tax, spend, and rob theater. At least that's the way I see it. Till next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.